This is Elevator People, conversations about taking ideas to the next level on behalf of visionary leaders. I'm your host, PJ Simmons, and I serve as VP of Marketing at Whiteboard, a creative agency serving visionaries seeking to make vision visible. Most businesses don't fail because of a lack of ideas. They fail because the founder becomes the lid. Chad Cannon has spent the last decade inside boardrooms and behind the curtain, helping visionary leaders navigate the gap between where they are and where they want to go. From launching personal brands to scaling multi-million-dollar ventures, he's become the go-to advisor for founders who are chasing not just growth, but legacy. In this episode, Chad pulls back the curtain on the hidden cost of chasing scale without strategy, why meaningful marketing matters more than ever in the AI era, how alignment, not just agreement, can make or break your team, and he covers the Obsess framework. He uses this to bring clarity to chaos. So whether you're building the thing or helping someone else build theirs, this conversation is all about how to think long-term, lead with vision, and grow with intention. Here's my conversation with Chad Cannon. Well, Chad, appreciate you joining me today. Excited. I know we've known each other for quite a while. You are living in Nashville now. You've been there for quite some time, and it's been fun following your journey. I know we've collaborated on a few things over the years, not in too much, detail, but you are in the thick of it, particularly in the space of working with business leaders, high capacity visionaries. And when I was racking my brain on who on earth could I have that has the qualifications as well as just both the battle scars and trophies to go along
Yeah,
with it.
hopefully more trophies than battle scars.
Trophies, right?
Yeah,
That's always the goal. But dude, so I don't, steal your thunder. Tell us what you got going on these days, man. What's Zenith Labs and where are you at in life?
yeah. Well, PJ, thanks so much for having me. Just as you said, I mean, it's been so fun to watch your journey and kind of see who you've helped along the way. And there's always times I'm like, I don't know who's helping that person, but I have a feeling it's PJ. There's just something about it. So it's really fun, and I love Taylor and the whiteboard crew over there, and so
Yeah.
it's fun to be able to help you out in whatever way possible. And this is the kind of stuff I just love talking about. So yeah, I'm a full-time kind of consultant, kind of serving small business visionary founders. I've just kind of walked my way into this through, time in publishing. A lot of authors are kind of visionaries, and I kind of got in the space around when social media, Facebook ads was like stealing candy from babies, helping authors launch their brands, to where a lot of them said, "Hey, what would it like for you to not only help me launch a book, but take my IP and build a business off of it?" And
Mm.
so it's where I spent a lot of my careers through, had my own agency working with the likes of Michael Hyatt, Lisa Turkirsch, Jenny Allen, a lot of people in the faith-based world. But then in working with Michael, we launched a business program called Business Accelerator, which we got behind the curtain of 3,000 plus businesses that range anywhere from $1 million to $30 million, understanding why some scaled and grew, why some didn't, why some stagnated. Dirty little secret, most of the time it is because of the visionary founder, is, either why, like John Maxwell calls it the law of the lid, and
Yep.
some people, their lid is, different than others, but at some point they hit the lid. And if they're not willing to change or hear outside voice or bring people around, well, I'm sure we'll dig into that, and so then when I left Michael, I went back to consulting. We ended up consulting with Donald Miller for a little bit. And then I joined Don's team full time and actually just transferred, and it was there for about 2.5 years. Transitioned out of that at the beginning of this year and kind of got back into full consulting. So I've got 2 consulting practices, kind of my own, just working with founders. And then I've got one of my clients is Studio Grow, which is Lisa Keeker helping boutique fitness studios grow and scale. They're in that $1 to $5 million range. And then I've got a couple other clients. And then I've launched Zenith Labs, which is a consulting company I have with a business partner. What's unique about that is we work together with businesses that have kind of hit a plateau, but have a 2 to 3 year plan of trying to exit. So we'll come
Mm.
alongside, reduce our consulting fee, and kind of participate in the exit, either in a profits
Yep.
interest role or kind of the exit piece of what that looks like. So It's really fun. It's been a wild ride. It's crazy to think that this consulting time, I'm only 3.5 months into it, and I look back at what's been accomplished. It just kind of blows my mind, and I'm grateful for the amazing clients that I get. And for whatever reason, word of mouth has just been what's. I don't have a website. I haven't had a website in 6 years, so I break
Yeah.
all the marketing rules when it comes to that.
Love it.
So don't listen to me on that. But you know, I know I just love this space. I love working with founders and just the stories. There's so many fun stories behind it, behind the scenes,
Yeah.
to what from what the public sees, and a lot of work, and these visionary founders have big ideas that can change the world, and they need people and partners like Whiteboard to help bring them to life. So
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm excited about diving into both perspectives, personal consulting and then group consulting that you're doing with Zenith. Part of this podcast and part of our philosophy of what we're putting our betting hats on as it pertains to the next iteration of marketing and the future of marketing is a lot of stuff with I think Scott Belsky did some
Mhm.
commentary on this around a transition from a noise-based economy, i.e., just attention grabbing the number of I'm blanking on the word, volume of marketing
Mhm.
that is out there, transitioning from that, that type of economy of marketing into more of a meaningful economy
Mhm.
of marketing.
Yep.
So as more and more noise, particularly with the introduction of AI, it just even compounding those efforts, there's going to start
Mhm.
being filters that are going to be put in place inside of the psyche of individual consumers that are looking for more meaning
Totally.
amidst the noise. And so as you made this transition, man, into working with visionaries, with leaders, you gave the illustration. Let's say 10 years ago or so, Facebook was very much like stealing candy from maybe you could put a turd in it and it'll turn into
Yeah.
a couple of $100. It was so
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like content is becoming that more and more. But
Mhm.
as you've been in this space and you're diving into adding value to guiding and advising visionaries and leaders to grow their businesses, what are you from a
Mhm.
meaningful framework, how are you integrating meaning into that? And what is kind of the purpose driven or meaningful thing that you're trying to help
Mhm.
do with visionaries and help them see in the process of growing and expanding their visionary capacity?
Totally. Man, I love that question. And I love this idea around meaningful marketing, and you touched on AI a little bit. I'm sure we'll dive into that.
Mhm.
But I think in the future, not too distant, we're going to start to see emails, websites, all of this made by humans, almost like our clothes made in the USA or made into,
Yeah.
like I think it's almost going to be required potentially because this authenticity that we as humans want and desire, and I leverage AI in my business every day. I'm not afraid of it. I think AI is incredible, but I think, and I read an article the other day where it's like, everyone's afraid that people are going to lose jobs because of AI. Like AI is not going to take your job, but someone that leverages AI is going to take your job if you're not doing
Mhm.
it,
Mhm.
and it's really, really true. But coming back, for me, I've just had the luxury of working with visionary founders that, we have a shared values alignment, not
Yeah.
necessarily faith based, but like wanting to change the world in some capacity. Obviously faith plays a big part of that just because of my background and all of it. And so it's easy. It's easier sometimes with those types of people to just say, hey, we're not in this to just generate a ton of money. Impact is just as important as the bottom line sometimes. And so those are the types of clients I try to partner with. And sometimes it's helping them get clear on what that is. Like I love helping small businesses because small business, someone in the church used to say, I won't say the name because he's disgraced now, is the local church is the hope of the world. I've said for a long time, I said, no, I don't think so. I think small business is the hope of the world. Small business tangibly changes generations, changes communities. It puts money in people's pockets that doesn't otherwise. The more local community, the more local businesses grow, small business, all of those types of things can change generations, can
Yeah.
change local communities. And so I love that. Like I partner with small businesses and typically form of the small, like someone we're working with, they're impacting small businesses. They're wanting to help small, some type of vertical in that. And one of the things that, and I spent the day with a client just now that's got a ton of leads coming in, but we don't know where they're coming from or what's
Mhm.
true about them. This is something I've been screaming from the mountaintops for years. people need to quit asking for just name and email address in lead forms. Gone are the days, like, we have to be so personalized in our email marketing, in our follow-up. And what do we know about someone coming in from name and email? We know nothing other than they've got some form of pain, but we don't know exactly who they are. And most companies have complex product offerings that aren't super clear for the person that's just coming in and opting into their email list or their
Yeah.
newsletter. And most people have, products that range from less than $100 to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. So this company's getting 300 leads a day, but we have we you know is 80% of them actually non-buyers? I don't know.
Mhm.
So for me, meaningful is like, I don't care about the number of leads. I care about the number of qualified leads in your funnel. And that's
Mhm.
meaningful to me. It's like way more meaningful than, like, like, to me, it's about engagement versus, likes and views, from a social media standpoint.
Mhm.
If you're engaged and you've got an audience that's engaged, whether you have 3,500 people and they're engaged versus 30,000 that's not engaged because you built your audience, that's not meaningful. So to me, I try to help them get clear on what is meaningful to know. I know this may be a different angle from a meaningful standpoint that you're looking,
Mhm.
but what's meaningful for you to know in your marketing so that you can sell more effectively through your sales process or your sales funnel.
Yeah.
And I've actually seen this with clients where they were capturing name and email, which was two fields. And you heard back in the day, the more fields you enter, conversion rate goes down. I've had it time and time again. We went from 2 to 8 with one client. Our conversion rate went up 20% overnight,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because the reason being, if you ask those questions correctly and how you set those up, people assume that you're going to give them targeted information. And if you are giving something of value away, people are willing to give more than name and email address. And if
Yeah.
someone's not willing to give you their name and email address, they're not going to, more than that, they're not going to buy from you.
Yeah.
So quit worrying about it. So if you're listening to this and all you have is name and email address on your lead forms and your lead captures, just come down like your core products. Start thinking about your products and come up with one question. And sometimes it's, to me, the easiest thing is, which role best describes you. Okay.
Mm.
So you may have a product that's based on who they are rather than how much money their business makes. But, are you the owner, CEO? Are you, a C-suite executive? Are you a director? Are you self-employed? And, all those types of things that you can, and which role best describes you is a very easy thing for people to answer. And, it's a great one to start with. It doesn't feel like a lot. Also, if you've got a sales team and, ask for the phone number. It amazes me that, like, people, oh yeah, we're going to do a campaign and we're going to text you. Oh, do you have your phone number?
Yeah.
Like, you're just not going to be possible. So
Thanks.
yeah, I'm going off on a tangent here. So I'll shut up and let you wrangle me back in, PJ.
No, that's great, man. What I hear in that though is, and we're starting to utilize this language more and more, is getting away from defining it necessarily as growth and utilizing more stewardship language. And you
Mhm,
talk about meaning and meaningful
mhm.
marketing. And I think the implications is multifaceted, multi-nuanced. I think it plays out in a lot of variations and a lot of different ways. One of the things that and this comes through trial and error and really just like my own personal background of constantly chasing the numbers, chasing the conversion rates, chasing the lead volumes, chasing, the engagements and the followers and all that good stuff. And I don't know. I don't know if it was just a personal realization of frustration, hey, realizing like, hey, every time I keep hitting these things, for some magical reason, the goal line continues to go up. Like it's
Mhm,
never enough for whoever I'm directly reporting to in some
mhm.
form or fashion.
Yeah.
And so when I started rethinking in full transparency, I still am working through this and struggling
Mm,
through this because old behaviors are hard to break,
yeah.
is when you start looking at things even to like a very minute specific detail like a lead form. When you start looking at these names, the financials, etcetera, as more than just metrics, but
Mm,
literal people on the other side that you are
yep.
trying to influence, serve, sell, ideally a product that enhances, their
Mhm,
lives and not exploits their lives.
Mhm.
your paradigm begins to shift in how you market, how you grow your business, how you steward your business, and I would love to maybe hear a little bit of your perspectives. Like, are you guys engaging in any conversations like that from a philosophical, theological worldview type way on how you're coaching businesses and business growth these days?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that's, it's the hard part of marketing. Like
Mhm.
I read an article, a Harvard Business Review article, I don't know, probably 6 years ago was when I was full time with Michael Hyatt. And it's probably longer than that, 7 or 8 years ago when I was the CMO. And the most highly turned over C-suite role is the CMO in any company, and it's like the average lifespan is 2 years versus the next is like 5 years.
Yeah.
So, it's 60% less time than the next C-suite executive as far as lifetime turnover rate. The reason being is what you're talking about.
Yep.
There's misaligned goals. And when you do
Mhm.
hit your goal, the goal just becomes 25% more next year for no other reason than
No
growth.
reason.
Yeah, just growth, but there's no strategy to growth. In fact, we might be doing less on the marketing side, but we just want more, that type of thing. Or we're cutting budget, but we want 25% more leads, all of that. And, for me, I believe in what I like, there's the conversation I have with our clients is like, there's one thing to have a top of the funnel lead generator that brings a lot of people in, but then doesn't convert, and then you're
Mhm.
looking at what piece of the funnel is not working whatsoever. Is that there needs to be a leakage of pain all the way through the funnel. And if the pain that you're solving through the top of the funnel is incorrect with what your products are, not linked to your products. There's actually a client
Mhm.
right now that is doing that. They've in the term self-liquidating offer, is that you've got this little, maybe $30 to $50 product in exchange, for ads to try to get people in the funnel and then do launches to those people and different things like that. And the goal is to liquidate your ad spend, at least. And the problem is it's liquidating their ad spend, but then they're not converting. And the problem
Yeah.
is what they're doing on the top of the funnel and the product, there's a mismatch. Like,
Mhm.
if I gave you the example wouldn't make sense right now. So that's why I'm not doing it. But it's like what they're selling and what someone's coming in at the top of the funnel and just paid $37 for. And then what it's such a difference. Like they focus so much on liquidating their ad spend that they've
Mhm.
forgotten how to solve the pain that that we've created a product for.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I'm working with is like I want people that are really like that it's really clear what their pain is. There's nothing more frustrating. And some of this is like, when we've got like I oversee a lot of sales and marketing, kind of sit in the chief revenue officer role, fractional, where I'm because to me, in this modern age of marketing, there's not a whole lot between sales and marketing difference.
Mhm.
There needs to be, I think sometimes we speak separate languages and we don't need to. I think
Totally agree.
sales picks up when there's a human interaction that needs to happen, and you can obviously look at sales from if you're handling a cart, and rather than a human, but it's just an online cart process that's sales, but it's really marketing language the whole time.
Mhm.
And the same thing in a sales conversation. It's just picking up where marketing left off. And there are some tips and tricks in sales and, different things of that nature. But again, like in my coaching of salespeople, we're not like I always say win every conversation. And I would say this, I think win every marketing opportunity. And what that means is it's serving our customer to the best of our ability. That doesn't mean
Mhm.
close every person in the funnel because we're going to make like our product's not for everyone. But if we're willing to lose a deal and promote our competitor because our competitor is actually a better fit for you, the customer, we're going to win long term. And so I've been having
1,000%.
I've been having that
Yep.
conversation for years, and I'm highly competitive. I don't like to lose. So I mean, my mantra is win every conversation. And that
Yeah.
again, and my team knows that winning every conversation means showing up, asking the right questions, and providing the right solution, even if the right solution isn't our product.
Mhm.
And to me, I think that's meaningful. It's adding value to the world. It's, if that person wants to go buy from a competitor or realize, oh crap, like I'm not ready to buy, but I'm going to come back in 6 months. You just believe they're going to come back in 6 months. You still have to do your job as a salesperson to follow up, nurture, build that relationship over 6 months and stay top of mind, follow up on an email. have some type of connection with their life. If they mention something about their kids, checking their, that type of thing. But it's hard because it still is a numbers game, so you
Yeah.
do need to have KPIs, and you still need to make sure that, hey, we know we need to get 1,000 leads a month if we're going to convert 100 sales a month or 50 sales a month. But like, because those are lead measures that help us determine if we're on track. And we do need to
Hmm.
be looking at that. But again, to me, it's the quality of the lead. And we had more quality leads than just looking at, like, this is where I think some teams get it wrong, is marketing's out here saying, I got all these leads for you. And then they talk, and the sales team's like, they're not qualified. There's not alignment there.
Yeah.
And if we all got aligned on what we were going to talk, like the messaging and all, because like marketing there's tricks that you can get people into your funnel, but they're in your funnel, but they're not actually interested in buying, you
Yep.
know? And so
Yeah.
that's not helpful. It's not meaningful. It's frustrating for everyone involved, including the customer.
Yeah. And the through line that I hear is, you hit on this a little bit earlier, is common values.
Mhm.
There's a value system and a value structure, not only with, I mean, the illustration you gave is the work that you do with, your clients, organizations that you work with. I think there's probably a mirrored understanding that, hey, to really do meaningful marketing, a marketer or a growth strategist needs to be within a values lined organization
Totally.
that they personally have. And then vice versa, as you're working to attract customers or prospects, like how do you
Mhm.
align their value set and pain point and problem through a deliverable or a service or a product that solves that
Mhm.
problem in a values aligned way, right? Because just because I have a problem, if I find a
Totally.
solution that, is offensive to my value set, in so facto, I'm not going to choose that solution if by definition it would still solve the need
Totally.
that I.
Well, and it's really hard because it seems like more now than ever, the algorithm wants people to do shady things.
Yeah.
It's how
Yeah.
you the showstoppers, it's
Hmm.
doing crazy things to get attention, and it's like standing still and pointing in the arrows, and, like, why do we have to do that?
Yeah.
Why can't we just, it's kind of frustrating. That can still be meaningful if it's done well,
Hmm.
but it's almost like we have to, from a marketing standpoint, you have to keep up with all this stuff. And why can't we just go back to, like, the Mad Men days of just writing really good copy, and like, it's just no longer like
Yeah.
it's how outlandish can we be to grab attention?
And the tricky
Which
thing is, and that, I mean, to bring it full circle, is exactly what you're talking about, of just pursuing growth for the sake of growth, just
Mhm,
for the sake of growth. Like, why? Like, what
mhm,
is the why behind the exponential hockey stick expectations or desires year over year? Like, is it more, is it better for us to view business as in, hey, for us to create the impact that we can or that we want to make, if we think about it through the lens of decades versus
mhm,
quarters, are we
mhm.
actually better off? Like,
Yep.
if we're actually wanting to make an imprint on the world, and that goes to, I mean, if you're selling widgets or courses or whatever, particularly if you're a values based service provider or business, like, your purview should be, how do I think about making impact for decades and generations versus like putting all of my eggs in this basket of, oh, if I'm not seeing this month over
Mhm.
month or quarter over quarter, then for some reason I'm failing or my team is failing. I
Totally.
think that mindset is, it's a scarcity mindset, really, is what gets us
100%.
into that sort of
Yeah.
activity.
Well, and I'll share. I mean, I just ended a relationship with a client recently, and it was a multi-year thing. I won't share the name, but we were really clear on, hey, here's some, like, and they had explosive growth expectations after years of declining. And I was like, they paid me a lot of money to come in and try to get them back on their growth trajectory.
Mhm.
So year one, after 3 years in a row of about 10% decline, was a 35% growth. And I felt really good about it based on, certain things that we had going for us, a new book coming out, different things. I was like, let's do it. And guess what? We hit it. We did 35, but then there was another 35% growth on the back end of that on year two,
Always.
always. And not only I felt like we had a good plan. The problem is this is the challenge working with some visionary founders. They started to chase the squirrel and started to
Mhm.
change things. And so we lost momentum. We started launching new things. We stopped working on things that really were working because it was hockey. They were like, actually, I don't want 35% anymore. I want 100%,
Yeah.
or 80%. And, I think, when I really tried to understand why that is, and we had conversations over the last 6 months before I was there. It's just like, hey, where you want the company to go is not where, and what you need to do is you need to take what you're paying me and hire 4 people, not 1 person.
Yeah.
The business has
Yeah.
changed from what we talked about. So we ended well. But I've looked back and be like, man, did I lose like things there where I kind of like didn't have like did I have spoke sooner into the visionary founder about
Mm.
where things were going and what could have changed and what like really wrestled us down to eight, why are we all of a sudden changing our growth plans? And guess what? We didn't grow. We actually went backwards because
Yeah.
we changed. We got our eye off of 35% and tried to become 80% and we went backwards, you
Mm.
know? And I would say we probably wouldn't have gotten to 35% 2 years in a row. We probably could have got to 20, 25%, but not 10% loss.
Mm.
Loss is the
Yeah.
wrong word, but backwards. Company
Yep.
was still extremely profitable. And that's the other thing is get frustrating when you feel like the scoreboard just, it's like it's negative because we went backwards year over year, but
Mhm.
the business owner took home multi-millions of dollars, you know?
So
So,
how would
uh,
you so what would you like, thank you for sharing that and, that transparency. I think a lot of folks who would listen to this have either found themselves in a similar situation, um, and or are currently in a similar situation. And so
mhm.
being on the other side of that, how would you encourage an individual like that who is just working through that struggle of feeling
Yep.
like, man, if I I and we keep getting all of these wins, but there never seem to be enough. The game keeps going and the
Yep.
the measurement stick always moves. Like, what
Yep.
frame of reference, what mindset should you encourage them to be in? What are some things that they should consider at this point of their career
Yeah.
level, etcetera?
Yeah, I try to say what only we can control, and
Mhm,
so, there's some people that have this outlook on life that they understand compounding interest and they've been investing, they've been following Dave Ramsey's model forever and
mhm,
they're going to be, millionaires and make more money than any of us at the end of the day because they've invested smartly and they've never made more than $125,000, a year and they've got more to show for it. And you've got the people that are chasing the unicorn. They want to make $20 million with no effort, or $100 million with no effort, or I joke when I say no effort, but like,
yeah,
build
yeah,
this business and, kind of what's taken people 30 years want to do in 3. Silicon Valley has kind of hurt that for everyone. Guess what? The reality is most businesses in Silicon Valley fail. We aspire to be the 1% of 1% to succeed in Silicon Valley and think we can do that. How many times in a boardroom or executive team, well, Apple's doing this, we should be able to do that. Tesla's doing this, we should be able to do that. Guess what? They have 100 million times more of the resources than we have. Yeah, there are certain things that we should be able to learn from them and understand the way consumers are thinking and that they've changed the game because of that. There's things that we can model and emulate. But what I would say is I think we have more power than we think we do in how we communicate to the founder. And if
mm,
you're gonna, and so I'll be frank, I've had my own, like even in counseling and therapy about this, of like, oh, there were conversations that I was kind of timid and didn't really share and let things kind of balloon to a point where I feel like I could have helped the organization more by having harder conversations earlier, even if it was the risk of me losing my job.
yep,
But it would have been best for the company. It would have caused future people not to lose their job potentially,
mhm,
and there wasn't a big downsize or anything like that. But I think I would say it's what can we control? We can't control that. If they want to be a unicorn, but I think we got to ask the right questions when we come into the organization. And I'm an Enneagram 8. So, like, my feelings are out there. I'm going to say how I feel. And I'm only going to work with people that understand that, you know? And that doesn't mean that, like, I'm always right. Like, I'm a big
mm,
believer in that I will put something out there to challenge the status quo to make, like to be devil's advocate to make sure that the idea, whether it's my idea or someone else's, this, how many times like I will argue with myself out loud if it's the right idea, and also knowing how do we bring that forward, but also not being afraid to challenge the founder because I think we have more credibility than we think we do. And obviously, you got to approach that conversation with grace. You have to approach that conversation with care and understanding that, hey, like your job is to think into the future more so than me. And I'm probably in the present, but also I'm a future oriented person and I want to win and succeed and serve our customers well and all of that. So, like, where you can find mutual ground. But here's what I'm concerned about is if we do this, I could be totally wrong, but here's what I'm concerned about, and you preface this by saying, "Hey, can I get an hour of your time? Let's go grab coffee." And there's just some things that I would love some more clarity. I'd love to share my thoughts. So it's a brainstorming. It's not like, "Hey, if you
Yeah.
don't do this, I'm out." It's because you may just be heard, and that person's like, "I hear you, but here's why we're doing this." It may provide some clarity that you didn't have otherwise, versus just kind of keeping it in. So if you're in that position, I mean, I could tell you countless times where I was able to do this with both Michael Hyatt and Donald Miller, where
Hmm.
I didn't necessarily agree and had conversations. And sometimes it changed the outcome. Sometimes it didn't.
Hmm.
But, and this is one thing I always say is, not everyone's going to be aligned or not everyone's going to be agreed to the decision, but we need to be aligned on the decision.
Yeah.
So in a team meeting, we can even say, hey, we're not all in agreement here that this is the best thing. You got 8 strong willed people on an executive team. Not everyone's going to be in agreement, but we need to do everything in our power before we leave this room to be aligned on this decision. Because if
Hmm.
we aren't aligned on this decision, it's going to, our company's going to feel it. The culture is going to come,
Yep.
the culture will be impacted. So I think that's another is like agreement and alignment are two different things. And
Hmm.
if you're not in agreement and you need to wrestle that to the ground with your visionary founder or someone else on your team, fight for alignment, not agreement is I think
Yeah.
a big thing. And it's a subtle thing, but it's important. Like, and realize you're not the visionary founder. You're not the one taking the risk. That person's
Yep.
taking way more risk than you. And so it's ultimately their call.
Yeah.
So, but I would also say, I get hired. They're hiring me because I've seen this. And,
Hmm.
Don even said, I want you to save me from myself sometimes, you know, like, so we sometimes get hired to do that, to provide insight that did not every person can speak into them, so you got to know your place. You got to know if that relationship can handle it. If you're a new employee on a team and you're not a manager or director of people, and you want to go tell the CEO or the founder a piece of your mind, probably not the best bet. You've got to kind of know the layers of leadership inside the organization,
Yeah.
and you've got to have you built up some goodwill to be able to have that conversation.
That's good. Yeah. Our CEO always says the most purposefully damaging thing that you can do to my business is to see a need and not speak up.
Yeah.
When you see something that needs to change or a better idea that could benefit the business and you hold it to yourself, that is incredibly damaging. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It takes, a lot of self awareness, a lot of
Mhm.
grace for those who are leading as well, and just work through
Mhm.
that with, the right relational
Yeah.
equity. But I love
Well,
that prompt.
yeah, and it's one of those that like it sounds like something one of the whiteboard guys would say. And the cynic in me and the devil's advocate, maybe someone's listening and is like, yeah, that sounds great, but I've done that before and it hasn't worked out well in my favor, you know,
Yep.
because there's a lot of unhealthy and toxic working environments.
Yep.
So it takes time to build that trust. And just because someone says it doesn't mean they live it out, at an organization level. And some days, and also depends on the day. And you don't know, maybe they just had a rough conversation with their CFO and cash flow's tight. And you come up with an idea and they're worried about cash flow and you're worried about something else. It's sometimes hard for them to kind of care about that when they're in their head trying to solve bigger problems. And you wouldn't even know it because they're not going to tell you, So those are always sometimes it's timing and you don't even know. So like I think it's just approaching it, the way you approach it, the way you set it up, the way you ask the question, just like any healthy relationship, it's like, being curious, and it's like, and it's
Yeah.
something about when you say, hey, can I share something with you? It does something to the other person's brain. It opens them up versus
Yeah.
I think, or we should, or this, just
And
saying, hey,
the way in
DJ,
which
if
I
you,
like yeah, I was gonna say the way in which I typically engage those conversations is my go-to preference is, "Hey, I wanna share something with as all the humility that I can
Mhm,
muster." Like,
mhm,
my posture in this is not to be accusatory intent, but I wanna be humble because there's some things that I may be missing, but I just wanna share,
mhm.
like, what's
Yep,
happening inside of my head and my heart.
totally.
So you hear and that tends to, like, just get
No,
the
it takes down
defense
all the
mechanism
defenses.
down.
Yep.
Yeah, because they
Mhm,
know that you're not on the attack.
totally.
And, to never assume ill intent on a leader because the more
Yep.
leaders that I work with and the more that, I'm in this game, the more the reality sets in that none of us ultimately know what we're doing. Some of us are a little bit more, well versed and have some skill sets and expertise, but at the
Yeah.
end of the
Yeah.
day,
We're making it up as
growth
we go.
in
Yep.
business, yeah, it is constant problem solving, engaging in
Mhm.
areas with problems that you've never
Yep.
encountered
It's uncharted
before.
water. It's uncharted
Yeah,
water.
it is, and so, like, there's a grace mechanism that you also have with those individuals, uh,
Mhm.
because you're you're just a group of people trying to figure it out, provide a goods and services to another person, which hopefully they find value in and wanna give you certificates of appreciation, which are dollars,
Yeah,
and
totally.
that's it, man.
Yeah, one thing I would say, I think that's important here, to maybe summarizes what you said, is that no founder or CEO is going to be upset with you sharing something you think is going to help their business grow, if that's your posture. So I think it's
Mhm.
important that, hey, I see something that I feel like is important to the business. Where that gets muddied is where you talk, if you bring your selfishness into it. If they feel like, this is actually, you feel like this is going to help you grow inside the company or this or that, and it feels dual intended or dual
Yeah,
intentioned, that's where it's like, oh, that it's easy for that founder CEO just to listen and not do anything with it. But if you come at it from a straight, hey, this is an opportunity that I see, it does, and it doesn't even affect me,
yeah,
those types of things are going to be received well more than if it's like, it's going to help you, it's going to make you shine more, it's going to give you more responsibility, that type of thing. Or it's like, oh, I think I could help do this,
yeah,
and the owner CEO is like, dude, just go do your job description,
yeah,
like that's going to be, or like, go talk to your boss about that, like, that's what they're thinking. Hopefully they don't just say that, but that's what they're thinking.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, and one of the things I wanted to dive into, and I know I wanna make sure that we're maximizing time well for you, and there may be some through lines here, hopefully, maybe not. But in Zenith Labs, you guys have a framework
Easy.
called Compass, the Compass framework. I would love for you to talk to us about that, break it down. I mean, we've talked about, like, coming alongside of visionaries, helping them see
Mhm.
opportunity. We've talked about being an internal team member, coming to your leaders. You sit in the unique seat where, even though, as a service provider and as a consultant and advisor, there's some tie into you. But as far as
Totally.
the oh my gosh, I don't have to necessarily fear of bringing this up because I won't lose
Mhm.
my job because you have other folks, waiting in line to
Mhm.
utilize your
Yeah.
services as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so maybe a framework like this could be helpful in
Mhm.
in some of these situations, but regardless, talk to us a little bit on how you're coaching these business leaders utilizing
Mm.
this framework.
Yeah, so the framework is actually obsess, not compass.
Obsess.
So,
Sorry, man.
yeah, no, you're
Yep.
fine. So the idea here was, me and my business partner were, one of the things we work about with what we say about founders and visionary CEOs is they're always obsessing about something. They may
Mm,
not be talking about it out loud, but it's maybe keeping them up at night. It's who they're searching online to find out, hey, what are they doing? Sometimes they're obsessing about lead generation. Sometimes they're obsessing about, do I have the right people on the bus? It's like, so for us, there's just like visionary CEOs, founders, they're just a different breed. They're always obsessing about something, The average
Mm.
human being, the average director at a company, they're not obsessed. They're kind of showing up and doing the work. But so that's why we've kind of used the words obsess. When we come in, the O stands for observe. This is something that I would say is like it gets missed a lot in consulting. We want to come in and prescribe a solution before we observe the problems. We observe what's working, what's not working. This is why I won't jump into any type of retainer working relationship until I do a 1 day strategy session with clients because I need to observe what's working, what's not. Otherwise, and I won't go into all of that, but like what we can do in 1 day would take 3 months virtually to do. If we can get the right people
Mhm.
in the room, we can do that in a day and get really clear and decide if it even makes sense to work together. Number two is benchmark. So we talked about data. Too many times as a consultant, we just come in and say, yeah, we'll help you achieve all those goals you just talked about, rather than actually let's benchmark. Let's look at industry average. Let's look at what you've done over the years. Is it possible?
Yep.
Here's what, here's the normal, here's the benchmark. Sure. We think we're better than everyone else. So we're probably going
Mhm.
to be a little bit better. But let's say you want 60%, the industry average 20%. Okay. How are we going to fill that 40%? In consulting, it's a lot easier to do that than obviously working in an employee relationship.
Right. Yep.
But you can also do the data, do the research and be like, hey, okay, this like I do believe we've got a magic sauce, but do we have 3 times the magic sauce in the industry average? I don't know. Should we contemplate that? The first S then is strategize. Okay, now that we've observed, now that we've benchmarked, now this is where we can strategize and start to build a plan. Then the E is execute. So this is the systems to execute the plan, and then scale. And then this is where, now that the systems are in place, we can really scale and to say, hey, hey, that 60% you wanted, hey, that's only possible if we do X, Y, and Z over the next 24 months. Then scale happens 36, 48 months. And then sustain is the last S,
Mhm.
and now we kind of start to sustain what that is. And to me, scale, I think scale is become adulterated in the business world and it's associated with hockey stick growth.
Yes.
Um,
Yep.
but I think scale to me is defined as better than industry average, but not
Mm.
unicorn like results. And defining that, hey, we are in a season of scale, which also typically means with a visionary founder CEO that you're going to take less money this year because
Yeah.
this is a year of investment to scale to reap the rewards over the next 2 or 3 years. So we
Mhm.
are a $3 million company, but we're going to invest like we're a $7 million company on people headcount because we can actually get to there, but then the same people are going to get us from 7 to 12 without additional headcount. And that's where scale
Mm.
happens. That's where the money falls to the bottom line for the founder. So sometimes you've got to just have that conversation. It's like, hey, you're going to take home less this year at the bottom line. You know, we're going to grow the top line, but sometimes scale, and if this happens for 2, 3 years, it means something's broken. You're
Mm.
not scaling at that point. You're just getting more dollars in, but it's not hitting the bottom line. And so you got to be looking at that,
Yeah.
and you've got to be willing to have those conversations because that starts to be where you've potentially invested in the wrong things, you've overinvested in areas that aren't necessary. But then the other thing, where I see most businesses, they don't want to invest in people, processes, or systems, and they want to just keep making more money just on the backs of their current people, and they're
Yeah.
burning them out. And that's when businesses, hover between a million and 3 million. One year it's like, oh, I got a big fish. We hit 3.5 million. Next year we didn't get the big fish. We're down to 1.75 million.
Yep.
Especially in
Yeah.
services based businesses, you see that a lot because,
Yep.
client A represents 60% of the revenue. You lose that client, it's not good. And that happens in a lot. It happens with lawyers. There's a big case that, then they don't have the big case because they haven't figured out the constant lead gen, the constant sales conversion, and the founder is still doing the majority of the selling. And then this is another thing that I love to help fix is the founder, I was like, I tried hiring a salesperson and it didn't work. So I just
Mm.
went back to selling. Oh, you did? You hired Jim. Like, what did you do to train them? Oh, nothing. We just kind of fed them to the
Nothing.
wolves.
Yeah.
They don't say
Yeah.
that, but like, that's what they end up saying. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, they're not the founder. They don't have the origin story. They don't have the charisma. They don't have the autonomy that you have to like basically make up a deal on the fly because you're the business owner.
Yep.
Like you've got to document your sales process.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I love more than anything, the light bulb for the founder to be able to hand off sales. And what I would say is if another salesperson can do your job 80% as good as you, it's so exponentially successful for your business, especially in the sales role,
Yeah.
because you add way more value to the business than selling product, And so does that mean you're gonna, in the first years, I mean, your sales gonna be 80% less? No, you're still gonna sell by relate, but you're not gonna be you're focused on selling all the customers. That
Yeah.
person's gonna learn and gonna get up to that. And so
Yeah.
that's something that I freaking love so much is like helping the founder get out of being the primary salesperson and
Yeah.
helping them hire that first salesperson where they
That's
don't have to
awesome.
do it.
That's so
So,
awesome. It reminds me of something that John Maxwell would always say in regards to training people. He said, "The only thing worse than training someone and them leaving is not training them and them staying." And I
jeez.
would probably make that akin even into your systems and your process. Like,
Mhm.
the only
So true.
thing the only thing worse than not up-leveling your systems and your processes and your documentation is continuing to run that playbook because you're gonna continue to get the same or less results, and it's just spot
Mhm.
on, and your obsessed framework is, I mean, come back at it once again, it sounds like stewardship to me, you know?
Mm.
Your observation, you take a look at the land, "Hey, how do we know where to go if we don't know, like, what the heck's going on, and, like, what's the
Mhm.
terrain look like? What are your realistic benchmarks? Like, let's is this a stewardship convo or is this a
Yep.
hockey stick
And
convo?"
let's be honest, those 2 things are hard to do
Alright, yeah.
they're hard to do, and as a consultant, we wanna get in and we wanna strategize and we wanna execute.
Mhm.
But the problem is, whether a consultant or whether you're coming in as a team leader or an executive, you're setting yourself up for failure if you don't do the observe and the benchmark well.
Dude, all the strategy becomes exponentially easier once
100%.
you take some
Totally.
time to do research,
Yep.
get an understanding your benchmarks. Then you're just like, "Oh, here's point A, here's point B. How do we
Mhm.
draw the straightest line between the 2?" Like,
Totally.
it's so much easier. I tell this to everyone that we work with, like individuals who come to us from marketing needs who immediately just like, "Oh, I need this done, that done. I need ads up. I need X, Y, and Z." The difference between those clients and those who are like, "Hey, let's take some time to talk to our customers, like develop
Mhm.
an appropriate strategy." The results are night and day
Totally.
from between the 2. Well,
Yep.
let's do this, man. I'm gonna hit you with some quick hits, closing reflections just on
Yep.
personal beliefs stuff around marketing, and we'll wrap it up. First quick hit. What's one marketing belief that you've had to unlearn throughout your career?
Ooh. Marketing belief. Hmm. Man, that's a hard question. I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is this product is for everyone. I don't know if I've ever believed it, but I think clients have believed it, and I've had to like really get good at helping clients not believe it. And it's huge
Yeah,
in the publishing space. Everyone writes a book, thinks it's for everyone, and then it just waters
man.
down in the messaging.
Yeah,
But I think it plays out in everything. It's like when you get attached to something, you're like, oh, this is for everyone.
yeah,
But the most successful businesses, this is probably, the most successful businesses have been built on a very small number of leads and a very small number of customers. So it
yeah,
doesn't need to be as big as you think it is. You
yeah.
know, if we were to
That's
talk
good.
about Whiteboard and the revenue of their business, I think the world would be surprised at how many few clients they work with on an annual basis,
Yeah,
potentially.
yeah,
In their head, they would probably be a larger number, that, we built a mid 8-figure business at Michael Hyatt. And I would say we probably had 30,000 customers, you
yep,
know, but 20 of those were $150 a year, and then
yeah,
10,000 of those paid a higher ticket, so a little different, but before we launched the planner, we were, doing north of 10, 20 million and had less than, 5,000 customers,
yep, yeah,
you know,
exactly.
so
All right, next one or a mindset every meaningful marketer should adopt.
that if a customer enters your database, they have a pain that they think you can solve. And if if they're not converting, it's typically because you're not communicating clearly enough about how your product solves that pain. 9 times out of 10, lack of conversion comes down to copy. I just, it's just something I've learned over the
Mm,
years. And we're
that's a good
not
note.
we're not tying, their pain to what we do to solve it really, really clear, you know.
That's good. That's
Yep.
good. All right, last one. You're talking to elevator people. What's kind of your last bit of encouragement for those who come alongside of visionary leaders helping to take their ideas to the next level? What would you encourage them with at this juncture of their career?
Great question. I think I th- I think there's so much beauty in visionary founders and CEOs that think there's nothing they can't do, nothing that they can't, bring to market that's going to change the world. And it is our job to lift them up, keep them inspired, keep them motivated. But it's also sometimes our job to keep them in check too.
Mm,
And obviously you've got to be working with someone that you have a relationship that they want, because I've seen it too much. I've seen it happen too many times where, it's like success after success after success, and the ideas only keep getting bigger, but the risk only gets bigger too with those ideas.
yeah,
And sometimes they get so big that they no longer listen potentially, or no longer care for group input. It's like
mhm,
everything I do turns to goal. So just do what I tell you to do. If you can build a relationship to always be close enough to that person wants your honesty. And that, again, that's very intentional.
mm,
And it's something that it's an art form. It's not something I can tell you exactly how to do it, but it doesn't mean that you're always sharing your opinion.
yeah,
Like, sometimes it means asking really good questions. Sometimes it means not agreeing, but aligning and making it clear why you don't agree, but why you're willing to align because of maybe past successes, you know? And while I leave this room, I'm going to sell this down the river to my team. We're going to execute like crazy, but never, if you're in disagreement about something, never leave a meeting misaligned. Your team will
yeah,
feel it immediately. Results will be impacted, and trust will be broken in a way that could never be repaired. I think that's
yeah,
the number one thing. If I were to say, if you don't agree, don't leave that meeting misaligned, or don't start to talk to your team and communicate a change or a new thing until you can get aligned with, whether it's the whole leadership team or the visionary CEO. And perfectly fine to just say, hey, like I'm I'm on board with where we're going. I don't necessarily agree, and I want to get aligned. And there's a couple things I feel like I need answers to for me to get fully aligned, so I can go in and communicate clearly to my team and get my team energized about this.
yeah. That's great. That's great. Chad, where can we find you online?
Yeah, so zenithlabs.io is a website about Zenith. Again, I don't have a website of my own personal consulting. So Instagram is probably the best way, just at ccannon21, CCANNON 21. I'm sometimes active, sometimes not. If I'm not active, it means I'm head down serving clients or spending time with my kids. So, for me, it's, again, like I've learned, built a career on social media, and I've seen the greatness of social media and the awfulness of social media. So it's not something I live and die by anymore, but it still is still such a driver for my business that it's hard to just totally ignore.
Beautiful. Thank you for listening to Elevator People. It would be an honor if you subscribed on your favorite podcast platform, and check out our agency website at whiteboard.is to help you and your team make your vision visible.